What's going on YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. It's Darian with Darian the Dev, and today I want to show you guys a side project that I'm working on and how to use an API in Java. First things first, here is the actual application. So right now you see random word equals epically, right? So I guess it would help if I kind of explain what the idea of the project is. I wanted to think of something that was going to be like practical, but something that I also would want to use. So I want to think about something that was simple enough to where I had faith that I could do it, so I wouldn't get frustrated midway through the project and then just stop working on it. I wanted to also make sure that it involved an API, because that's something that after bootcamp I wanted to get more practice on my own working with and connecting to APIs. So I wanted to make something that I knew I could finish, or that would be within my capabilities of doing right now. I wanted to use an API, and I wanted to be something that I obviously wanted to use. So those are kind of like the three things that determine what I was gonna make, and I guess maybe for you guys too, those would be some good things to keep in mind as you come up with ideas for side projects. Anyways, so a word is gonna come up, a random word from a dictionary is gonna come up. In the text field below that, I wanted to be able to enter a synonym of that word, and if it's right, I want the program to give me a new word and let me keep going and like rack up a score or something. And then if I get it wrong, then it just keeps track of how many I already have gotten right, or it gives me the option to start over, or whatever the case may be. I haven't really got that far ahead yet. So first things first, how do you get random words, right? And this is perfect because this is where my API comes into play. So I looked at a bunch of different dictionary APIs and things like that. I wanted to make sure that the API was free. That was a big deciding factor in whether or not I was going to use a certain API. Is it going to cost me money? And number two, how is the documentation, or how does it look? Is it simple to follow? Is there a lot of documentation? Things like that. So the API I ended up going with is actually called Wordnik. Let me just show you. This is the word epically, obviously, and then if I refresh the page, we're going to get amendatory, which I don't even know what that means, but that's a good thing. So that's what I want my program to do. I want it to give me a bunch of random words. I can expand my vocabulary. I can type in a word of what I think it means, and if it's not a synonym of that word, then it'll tell me I'm wrong and give me a new word, or give me a chance to start over, whatever. So a way to expand my vocabulary, but also my programming skills, whatever. So yeah, so if I just keep refreshing the page, self-determining, each time I get a new word. And this is all coming from the Wordnik API. So let's take a look at the documentation. So when I got to Wordnik, let me go to the home page first. So when I came to this API, right here, here's the first step for me. Sign up for a Wordnik API key, which you're going to need more times than not in order to connect to an API, so that that API knows that your program is requesting the access. Your program is identified, essentially. So the key pretty much is what does that. I can't speak 100% for every API, but a lot of APIs, generally you're gonna have some sort of key that is gonna give you access to that API. Sign up to get access to definitions from 5 dictionaries, including the American Heritage Dictionary, for synonyms, antonyms, and other related words. So synonyms is all I want. So when I see that I can get definitions from 5 dictionaries and I can get synonyms, that's pretty much my giveaway that I'm gonna want to use this API. Also the fact that I could get the API key and use it for free. So those 3 things pretty much answer all the questions I was looking for, so I decided to go with Wordnik. So also they have a random word API too. So as opposed to writing an algorithm that would create or keep continually hitting the API for a random word, and me having to write that logic, this API actually has a random word generated for you within the API if you connect to it and use it that way. So I thought that was really, really cool. Once I got my API key, I came here to the documentation. And this is where you're gonna wanna look to see, how do I use this thing? So for me, I went inside of words, and right here we have random word. Perfect. That's all I need. So now it's time to look inside of here and see what type of documentation we have. So at first glance, it's probably all is gonna look a little bit overwhelming. You might not know what to do with this stuff, but don't worry, because not all of it matters. So first thing I would say, pretty much ignore everything you see here with parameters, at least for the sake of what we're doing. None of this stuff really matters. So I'm gonna click try it out right here. So this is all that I really care about, is the response body. So this is what's gonna come back in my program. So once I successfully connect to the API, the response I'm gonna get from the Wordnik API is simply gonna be an ID and a word. Those are the only two things that really matter to me. In all this documentation right here for a random word, I'm gonna ignore pretty much all this stuff up here. I'm gonna ignore everything inside parameters. All I care about is the request URL right here, which is obviously the URL that I'm gonna need to connect to in order to get the random word from the API, and then the response body. So what does that response look like? Inside the request URL, you notice that we have this gigantic URL, right? And then at the end, it says, I know it's a little hard to see because for some reason this bar will not go away once you click it. But you guys can see right here, it says key equals your API key. And that is where we want to connect the key that we get from Wordnik to the end of this long URL inside of our program. And that's what's gonna let us know that we're hitting the right URL with the right authorization to be able to get the random words from their API. So it's almost like making sure that we have the permission to actually get words from their API. Boom! All right, so now let's jump into the actual code. The first thing I did was actually create an index page, and I just made sure first that I could get hello world to show up. So when creating a new project, in this case I'm using Spring Boot, the first thing that I always do, and this is something that I learned in Bootcamp, first I made an index page that originally had hello world show up, just to make sure that when I went to localhost 8080, like you guys saw me run, when I showed you the random word, I just wanted to make sure that I could actually get something to show up, which once that was done, now we can move on to the next step, and I'm about to show you guys now. Boom. So now we created in this case, I created an object, but I called it a random word object because it's going to be a random word. And so the only things that really are important here is, of course, knowing these things. So JSON ignored properties, that is something for another video. You guys can look it up in Google or on Google if you want, but just know that it was not required for what I'm doing here. In order to create the random word object, I just created, obviously, a class I created a file called randomword.java, and literally it has two things. It has two variables. It has an integer variable that's an ID, and it has a string variable that's called word. The reason why is because right here in our response body, it literally tells us what a random word is made up of, which is an ID and a word. So when I created a random word object in my application, it's pretty much making sure that it matches what the API is trying to send to us. So I had to create that so that when I say, hey, give me a random word, that my program knows what a random word should be. So you have to create a random word object. The next thing is to obviously try to get a random word from the API. Let me show you guys just how few lines of code it took to actually connect to Wordnik's API. So what you guys are looking at right now is literally all the code that it took in order to connect to the Wordnik API and to get those random words like you saw in my application. So I'm just gonna go through this very high level. We're not going super in detail here. I just want you guys to at least be able to familiarize yourself with what Java code might look like when attempting to connect to an API. And also just hopefully seeing my workflow or thought process will help maybe some of you guys when you go to connect to your own APIs for your own programs or whatever the case may be. Right here, the @value annotation with this funky looking $ with the brackets that says Wordnik.key. That is because the actual key that I got from Wordnik, which is a series of letters and characters and numbers, is actually stored in my application properties. So I'm not gonna show you guys that because not that I don't trust you guys, but I'm just gonna keep that safe for right now. I'm not gonna actually show it on my screen, but so over there, it has a name of Wordnik.key. So that's why the @value annotation is connected directly to Wordnik.key. And then I have a private string called Wordnik. So that string is actually going to assign the value of my key from Wordnik to a string called Wordnik. So now anytime I want to actually use my API key in my program, all I have to do is use the private string called Wordnik. From my experience, you're always gonna need HTTP headers when you are working with an API in Java. So that is why you see me creating an instance of an HTTP header right here, because they're pretty much exclusively always necessary when connecting to an API. And so this next line of code right here that you see commented out, funny that I have this comment out because I want to show you guys why this didn't matter. So let's go back over to documentation. So if you see right, where is it? Right here. So if you see response headers, content type, application /JSON, char set, UTF-8, none of that actually mattered. And that's why I have it commented out, because this is something I actually was trying to figure out when I was trying to connect to the API. I kept trying to figure out where to put this, application JSON thing and char set, and I was trying to figure out where it belongs inside of my code here. But I ended up realizing that I didn't even need it. And so it was actually causing me more issues to not allow me to connect to the API. So once I figured out how to properly connect to the API without it, I put it back in, which is why it's commented out here, just to see if it would still work. And then it did continue to work if it was in here. However, I didn't need it. So I just wanted to leave that comment out so you guys can see, but now I'm just gonna delete it because it doesn't affect anything anyway. We need an HTTP entity, which is pretty much gonna be what we send over. When we're trying to tell the API what we want. So HTTP entity, we're sending you something in the form of a string, which is why there's a string right here. And I just named it entity for simplicity. And I just gave it a name of parameters, and it's gonna connect to our header here. And our REST template, again, something that in my experience, you're just always going to need one when you're using Java to connect to an API. I'm not 100% sure why, but it's just a thing you're going to need. Same thing with the HTTP header. So again, you're just gonna always need an HTTP header, and you're always gonna need a REST template. And I'm using Java 8 too, by the way. So if anybody's using Java 11 or something like that, and you guys know a different way of doing this, please let me know down in the comment section. I would love to know what the more up-to-date way of doing this is. This is just the way that I learned and that I've been practicing since I learned it this way. And then we have a response entity, which is what we are going to want as our response back from the API. The response entity is going to be of the type random word, which is again why we created this random word object right here, because a random word is going to consist of an ID and a word that comes from the API based on the directions the API gave us. And then I just named the REST template RT. So we're going to use a method in the REST template class called exchange. And this is now where I'm going to put, as you can see, this entire URL that we got from here. So I can just show you guys and make sure I'm being thorough. This is the same API that we got here from the request URL. I'm sorry, the same URL that we got from right here, the request URL. And at the end, it says we have to replace your API key with our key. So what we did here is key equals, and we close that as the end of the string, and then we add Wordnik, the string, because again, don't forget that Wordnik is now the actual variable for the API key that we have in our application properties. And then from there, we want a get, we want to make a get request. So we use http method.get. Again, this is all stuff for a whole separate video. So feel free to look anything up that I'm not explaining or that I'm not explaining very well, because there's probably a lot of it, but I just want to show you guys very high level what some of this stuff even looks like in Java. So yeah, so http method.get is what we're requesting, or no, we're making a get request to the API. So that's why we have that there. And then we're going to use our entity from up here, our HTTP entity. So we call that by name right beside it. And then at the very end, we want to use the random word class, because that's where our random word object is from. So we want to use that class at the very end to let our request know what we're expecting back again. And then at the end, we just return a random word, and we're doing get body toString, because as you can see over here in the random word object, the toString is going to be random word plus the word, which is why when over here inside the program you see random word equals the word, the random word. So if we hit refresh again, let's see, suggestiveness, we get another word. So again, I know that's probably a lot, guys. I'm sorry if I wasn't extremely clear, but again, I'm just trying to share my journey with you guys and the things that I'm learning when I learn them. I'm trying to share them with you guys. Hopefully some of the terminology or just seeing some of my code can at least help some of you guys know what you need to connect to an API, or hopefully it just makes the path to using an API a little bit more clear, is really all I'm hoping for whoever is newer to programming who's watching this video. Again, I'm really sorry if I didn't explain things super well and in depth and everything. And yeah, feel free to correct me on anything down in the comment section below too if you guys come up with anything, because I'm always willing to learn. So please don't just rip me apart if I misspoke on something. But again, I'm learning and I'm documenting this as I go. So yeah, so next steps for me and next steps for this project, obviously I need to be able to create that text field and write the algorithm, I suppose, that is going to cross-check the word that I type into the text field and see if it is a synonym of the random word that we get back. And then, you know, from there, keep working through the program, I guess. But that is my next big step. Putting the text field there and making sure that it checks whatever you type into that field against any words that are a synonym of the random word. So again, thank you guys for watching so much. Please, if this was helpful at all, like, share, subscribe, tell a friend. You know, it really helps keep me motivated to make videos for you guys. And I got a lot more content coming, so make sure you guys stick around. It's Darian, this is Darian the Dev. I'll see you guys in the next video.